10 seconds. That is the rule. When a boxer falls, the person in charge counts to 10. If the boxer is not up, the fight is over. But what if those 10 seconds stretch into 13 or 14 or even more? What if a whole story, a whole piece of history could change inside just a few extra heartbeats? This is a story about a fight where time itself seemed to bend, and a champion was saved by a mistake. It was a time of big crowds and bright lights. People loved boxing. And the biggest star of all was a man named Jack Dempsey. He was a hero. He came from a small, poor town and fought his way to the top. His punches were like thunder. When he hit someone, they fell. He was the king of all fighters, and the people adored him for his wild, powerful style. But every king must face a challenge. For Jack, that challenge was a man named Gene Tunney. Gene was the opposite of Jack. He was quiet and smart. He read books. In the ring, he did not fight like a wild animal. He fought like a thinker. He moved with grace, and he planned every punch. He was not a brawler. He was a boxer. The two men had fought once before. Everyone expected Jack, the powerful hero, to win easily. But Gene, the smart fighter, had a plan. He moved and danced, staying away from Jack's thunderous hands. He tired Jack out, and in the end, the thinker beat the brawler. Gene Tunney became the new champion. The world was shocked. Jack Dempsey was heartbroken. Losing was a feeling he did not know well. For a year, he went away. He thought about his life, about the fight. He knew he had to come back. He had to prove he was still the best. So he went back to the gym, to the hard work, the sweat, and the pain. He trained harder than ever before, his mind set on one thing: getting his title back from Gene Tunney. Gene, now the champion, did not rest. He knew Jack would come back like a storm. He had to be ready. He trained his body and his mind. He studied Jack's fights, looking for any small thing he could use. He knew the world saw him as the man who got lucky. He wanted to prove that his win was not a mistake, that he was the true champion. The night of the big rematch arrived. Over 100,000 people filled a giant stadium in Chicago. The air was electric. Everyone was there to see if their hero, Jack Dempsey, could reclaim his crown. It was more than a fight. It was a story the whole country was watching. Could the old lion roar one more time? Before the fight, a new rule was put in place. It was a small thing, but it would become the most important rule of the night. The rule said that if a fighter knocks his opponent down, he must go to a far corner, a corner with no one in it. The person in charge, the referee, could not start counting until the fighter was in that corner. It was a rule meant to give the fallen fighter a fair chance. The fight began. For 6 rounds, the two men battled. It was a hard, tough fight. Gene, the smart boxer, was winning. He was landing more punches. He was moving well, keeping Jack from landing his biggest, most powerful shots. Jack looked tired. It seemed like the story would be the same as their first fight. The crowd grew quiet. Their hero was losing. Then came the 7th round. Something inside Jack woke up. The old fire returned. He came out of his corner like a flash of lightning. He threw a flurry of punches, one after another, fast and hard. He hit Gene with a left hook, then a right hand. Gene stumbled back, hurt. Jack saw his chance. He threw more punches, a storm of them. Gene Tunney fell. He crashed down to the floor of the ring. The champion was down. The crowd exploded. This was the moment they had been waiting for. This was the Jack Dempsey they loved. He had done it. He had knocked down the man who took his title. The fight seemed to be over. But then, something strange happened. Jack, in his excitement, forgot the new rule. Instead of going to a far corner, he stood over Gene. He was an old-school fighter. In his day, you stood there, ready for your opponent to get up so you could knock him down again. He was waiting, ready to finish the fight. The referee, a man named Dave Barry, saw the problem. He could not start the count. The new rule was clear. He waved at Jack, yelling at him to go to the far corner. But in the noise of the giant crowd, Jack could not hear him. Seconds ticked by. 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds were lost as the referee tried to push the old champion away. Finally, Jack understood. He turned and walked to the far corner. Only then could the referee turn his attention back to the fallen Gene Tunney and begin to count. He started at 1. But Gene had already been on the ground for several seconds. The clock inside his head was different from the referee's count. The referee's count went on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Gene was looking at him, his mind clear. He was hurt, but he was not knocked out. He was waiting. He knew he had extra time. 6, 7, 8. Gene put one hand on the floor of the ring, getting ready. At the count of 9, Gene Tunney pushed himself up. He was back on his feet. The crowd could not believe it. He had survived the storm. But how long was he really down? Some people who were timing the fight said it was 13 seconds. Others said 14, maybe even 15. It was much longer than the 10 seconds allowed. The feeling in the giant stadium changed in a second. One moment, there was a wild roar for Jack Dempsey. The next, there was a sea of confused faces. Some people thought Jack had won. Others were angry at the referee. And a small few who supported Gene felt a tiny spark of hope. The fight was not over. It had become something else entirely. This all happened in a place called Soldier Field in Chicago. More than 100,000 people were there. The noise was like a thunderstorm. You could not hear the person next to you. In this giant wave of sound, the referee's shouts were lost. The fighters were in their own world, a small square of light surrounded by a universe of noise and doubt. The confusion came from the new rule. It was made to make fights safer, to give a fallen fighter a real chance to recover. But many people, including the old-school Jack Dempsey, were not used to it. They were used to the old ways of fighting. This one new rule, meant to bring order, had instead created total chaos. It turned a clear knockout into a puzzle with no right answer. Now, the two men stood facing each other again. Everything was different. The power had shifted. Jack looked at Gene, seeing a ghost. A man he had put away was now standing before him, clear-eyed and ready. And Gene looked back at Jack, and he saw a man whose best punch was not enough. The fire in Jack's eyes was met with cold, hard ice in Gene's. In that moment, the fight was truly won and lost. Not with a punch, but with a look. The extra seconds had not just cleared Gene's head, they had refilled his spirit. For Jack, those same seconds had drained his own. He threw his best storm at his enemy, and his enemy was still standing. He had to keep fighting, but his heart knew the chance was gone. It was the long count. Jack Dempsey was in shock. He had hit Gene with his best punches. He had knocked him down. In his heart, he felt he had won. But Gene was standing there, ready to fight again. The round ended, and Gene survived. He had been given a gift of extra seconds, and he used them to recover. The rest of the fight was different. Gene, now fully awake and careful, stayed away from Jack. He used his smarts, his boxing skill, to control the final rounds. Jack tried to land another big punch, but his chance was gone. The fire he had in the 7th round was put out. He had given it his all, and it was not enough. When the final bell rang, there was no doubt. Gene Tunney had won the fight. He was still the champion. He had proven that his first victory was not a mistake, but a shadow hung over his win. A question that would never go away. What if the count had been normal? For the rest of his life, Jack Dempsey believed he should have won that fight. He felt the title was taken from him not by a punch, but by a mistake, by a few extra seconds. He never blamed the referee or Gene. He blamed himself. "I just forgot," he would say. It was a simple mistake that cost him everything. Gene Tunney always said he could have gotten up sooner. He claimed he was waiting for the count to reach 9, to give his head as much time as possible to clear. He believed he would have been up at the count of 7 or 8, even with a normal count. We will never know for sure. The long count became a legend. It is one of the most talked about moments in all of sports. It shows how a tiny detail, a forgotten rule, can change everything. It created a great what-if story. What if Jack had gone to the corner right away? Would he have become champion again? The story is not just about a mistake. It is about two very different men. Jack, the people's champion, a fighter with a heart as big as his punch. And Gene, the smart, disciplined champion who proved that brains could beat power. Their two fights tell a story about the different ways a person can be strong. The referee, Dave Barry, was just a man doing his job. He had to follow the new rule. He could not start the count until Jack was in the corner. He did what he was supposed to do, but his actions became part of the story forever. He was the man in the middle of the storm, trying to keep order in the middle of chaos. The moment also shows how boxing was changing. New rules were being made to make the sport safer and more fair. Jack was a fighter from an older, wilder time. The new rule was a sign of a new era, an era that Jack, for a few important seconds, was not a part of. The lost seconds in that ring in Chicago were more than just time. They were filled with hope for one man and confusion for the other. They held the roar of the crowd, the weight of a championship, and the future of two fighters' lives. It was a moment frozen in history, a moment that everyone would look back on and wonder about. In the end, Jack Dempsey remained a hero to the people. His loss did not change their love for him. Maybe they loved him even more for his honest mistake. He was human. He was not perfect. He was one of them. He opened a restaurant and became a beloved figure, always happy to talk about the old days. Gene Tunney retired as the undefeated heavyweight champion. He had beaten the great Jack Dempsey twice. He had proven his point. He lived a long, quiet life, far from the boxing ring, with his books and his family. But the shadow of the long count always followed him, a question mark next to his greatest victory. The story of the long count teaches us something. It teaches us that in sports and in life, small moments can have big results. A single mistake, a few seconds of confusion, can change the path of history. It reminds us that even heroes can forget, and that sometimes the biggest fights are decided not just by strength, but by rules, by time, and by chance.